Aaron stood frozen at the edge of his driveway, the acrid smell of smoke thick in the air and flames licking the horizon. The once serene neighborhood he called home was now a blazing inferno, and the relentless winds only seemed to taunt the efforts of the firefighters. "We have to leave now," he shouted, his voice cracking as he glanced at his father-in-law, who stood trembling beside him. The older man's frailty was evident, his Parkinson's making every movement a struggle. Time was slipping away, and the fire wasn't waiting. Just hours earlier, the morning had seemed ordinary, blue skies and a calm breeze. But by midday, the world had transformed into chaos. Emergency alerts buzzed on phones. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the once clear sky turned a haunting orange. The fire was spreading faster than anyone imagined, devouring everything in its path. Entire streets were disappearing, reduced to ashes in moments. Aaron had thought about grabbing keepsakes, photos, heirlooms, anything, but there wasn't time. "I'll come back for them," he had told himself, but deep down he knew he wouldn't. As they hurried down the street, the heat was unbearable. Flames roared like wild beasts, consuming homes and cars. Smoke stung Aaron's eyes, and his father-in-law coughed uncontrollably. They had no car, no way out, until a stranger, a neighbor they had never met, pulled up. "Get in now," the man yelled, and without hesitation, they piled into his car. Aaron looked back one last time as the fire closed in. Memories flashed before him. Birthday parties in the backyard, quiet evenings on the porch. All of it was gone. Elsewhere in the city, Marina stood on a crowded street, clutching her phone and watching in disbelief as smoke billowed from the direction of her apartment. Just 4 months ago, she had arrived in America, escaping the war in Ukraine. This was supposed to be her fresh start, a chance to rebuild. But now, her new home was gone too. "Why does this keep happening?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She had nothing left, no documents, no belongings, just the clothes she was wearing. The fires were merciless, sparing no one. Ordinary families, celebrities, even entire communities. Emergency shelters filled quickly, offering a temporary refuge for those with nowhere to go. Yet, as the days dragged on, the scale of the disaster became overwhelming. Over 180,000 people had been evacuated, with thousands more bracing for the worst. Rumors swirled of arson, but no answers came. All that remained was devastation. Aaron turned to the stranger who had saved them and managed a shaky "thank you," but his gratitude was laced with fear. Fear of what they had lost, and fear of what was still to come. For as the car sped away from the inferno, Aaron realized the fire wasn't the only thing they had to survive. And then, just as they thought they had escaped, a wall of flames appeared ahead, blocking the road. "What now?" Aaron yelled, panic rising in his chest. The stranger gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Hold on." To be continued. The car screeched to a halt, the tires skidding on the scorched asphalt as the flames ahead roared like a living beast. Aaron's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. His father-in-law gripped his arm tightly, his trembling fingers a silent plea for safety. The stranger, whose name Aaron still didn't know, cursed under his breath, his eyes darting around for an escape. "We can't go back, and we can't go forward. What do we do now?" Aaron's voice cracked as panic clawed at his chest. The air inside the car was suffocating, filled with the heavy stench of burning wood and plastic. Every second felt like an eternity as the fire crept closer. The stranger finally spoke, his voice calm but urgent. "We'll have to cut through the back roads. It's risky, but it's our only shot." He yanked the wheels sharply, turning into a narrow dirt path barely visible through the haze. Aaron held his breath as the car jolted and bumped over the uneven terrain, the flames still visible in the rearview mirror. As they drove, Aaron's mind raced. How had it come to this? Just days ago, life had felt normal, even predictable. But now his neighborhood was gone, his home reduced to ash, and his family's safety hanging by a thread. He glanced at his father-in-law, who was slumped in the seat, staring blankly ahead. The man had barely spoken since they left, his silence weighing heavy on Aaron. "Hang in there," Aaron murmured, though he wasn't sure if the words were for his father-in-law or himself. Meanwhile, miles away, Marina stood in the corner of the evacuation center, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The large hall buzzed with activity. Families huddled together, volunteers handing out blankets and food, children crying softly in the background. Yet, despite the chaos, Marina felt utterly alone. She had lost everything again. The war in Ukraine had already taken so much from her, and now the fires had finished the job. A volunteer approached her, offering a warm smile and a bottle of water. "Are you okay?" the woman asked gently. Marina wanted to say yes, to pretend she was fine, but the lump in her throat made it impossible to speak. Instead, she shook her head, tears threatening to spill over. The volunteer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice steady and kind. But Marina couldn't help wondering, how? Back on the dirt road, Aaron's car jolted violently as it hit a large rock, nearly sending them off the edge. "Watch it," Aaron shouted, his knuckles white as he gripped the dashboard. The stranger didn't respond, his focus fixed on the narrow path ahead. The flames were no longer visible, but the threat lingered. Every gust of wind carried the risk of embers, reigniting the surrounding brush. As they rounded a bend, a new problem emerged. A fallen tree blocked the road. Its charred branches sprawled across their only way out. Aaron's stomach sank. "We're trapped," he whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of the raging wind. To be continued. Aaron stepped out of the car, his legs shaking as he stared at the massive tree sprawled across the dirt road. The bark was blackened and still smoldering, the heat radiating off it like an invisible wall. Behind him, his father-in-law let out a low groan, and the stranger slammed his fist on the steering wheel in frustration. "We can't stay here. The fire could catch up any second," the stranger snapped, his voice sharp with urgency. Aaron nodded, though his mind was blank, struggling to come up with a plan. The wind picked up, carrying with it the unmistakable crackle of burning brush in the distance. Aaron felt a lump rise in his throat. They didn't have much time. "We'll have to go on foot," he said finally, glancing back at his father-in-law, who looked pale and exhausted. The older man shook his head weakly, his lips trembling as he muttered, I can't do it." Aaron knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. "You can and you will. We'll help you. But we have to move." The stranger grabbed a flashlight from the car and slung a small bag over his shoulder. "There's a creek about a mile east. If we can make it there, it might slow the fire down enough to buy us time." Aaron didn't know if the man was right, but it was better than standing there waiting to be engulfed. He helped his father-in-law out of the car, the man's legs unsteady beneath him. With an arm around his shoulders, Aaron supported him as they began the slow, grueling walk. Elsewhere, Marina sat quietly in the corner of the evacuation center, watching as a young boy clutched a stuffed animal, his face streaked with soot. His mother sat beside him, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Marina felt a pang of guilt. She wasn't the only one who had lost everything. All around her, people were grieving, yet they still found the strength to comfort each other. A man approached, his face lined with exhaustion, but his voice calm. "We're organizing a group to help locate missing people. If you'd like to volunteer, we could use all the help we can get." Marina hesitated. She felt helpless, like she had nothing left to give. But then she thought of her neighbors, the elderly couple who lived next door, and the young family on the first floor of her apartment building. Were they safe? Did they even make it out? "I'll help," she said, standing up. The man handed her a clipboard and a flashlight. "Thank you. We're heading to the outskirts of the evacuation zone. Stick close to the group and stay alert." Marina took a deep breath and followed him, unsure of what she would find but determined to do something. Back on the dirt road, Aaron and the stranger pushed forward. Their breaths labored and their faces slick with sweat. The creek finally came into view, its waters shimmering faintly in the moonlight. But as they approached, they realized the path was blocked by another obstacle. This time, the sound of voices. Aaron froze. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, his pulse quickening. The stranger nodded, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows. The voices grew louder, and soon figures emerged from the darkness, their faces obscured by scarves and masks. One of them stepped forward, holding something glinting in the dim light. "This isn't your way out," the figure said coldly. Aaron's heart sank as he realized their nightmare was far from over. To be continued. Aaron tightened his grip on his father-in-law, who leaned heavily against him, struggling to stay upright. The figures blocking their path remained still, their faces hidden behind scarves, but their posture radiated authority. The glint of the object in the leader's hand, was it a knife, made Aaron's stomach churn. "We're just trying to get to safety," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "The fire is closing in behind us." The leader tilted their head slightly, as if considering his words. The air between them was tense, crackling with unspoken threats. Finally, the figure spoke again, their voice low and steady. "This creek leads to a path we control. If you want to pass, you'll have to trade." Aaron's heart sank. "Trade? Trade what?" he asked, glancing at the stranger, who was gripping the flashlight like it was a lifeline. "Anything valuable," the leader replied, their tone almost casual. "Water, food, supplies. Whatever you have." Aaron felt a wave of anger rising in his chest. "They're extorting us in the middle of this nightmare." He looked back at his father-in-law, whose face was pale and glistening with sweat. "They didn't have time for this." "We don't have anything," the stranger interjected, his voice sharp. "We barely escaped with our lives. Can't you see the fire? If we stay here, we'll all burn." The leader's eyes flickered to the horizon, where the faint orange glow of the fire was growing brighter. For a moment, Aaron thought they might let them pass, but then the leader stepped closer, their voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Everyone has something." Aaron's mind raced. What could they give? They had no supplies, no valuables, nothing but the clothes on their backs. And yet, the thought of turning back was unthinkable. His gaze fell on the stranger, whose jaw was clenched tightly. The man seemed ready to fight, but Aaron knew that wouldn't end well. They were outnumbered, exhausted, and unarmed. Behind them, the sound of the fire grew louder, a deafening roar that seemed to mock their predicament. The heat was becoming unbearable, and ash rained down like snowflakes, stinging their skin. Aaron felt his father-in-law sag against him, his strength fading fast. Time was running out. "Please," Aaron said, desperation creeping into his voice. "We don't have much, but maybe we can work together? If we all move now, we can get ahead of the fire." The leader hesitated, their masked face unreadable. The others exchanged glances, their body language suggesting uncertainty. Aaron's heart pounded. Was this it? Would they finally move? But before anyone could respond, a deafening crack echoed through the forest. A massive tree, weakened by the flames, came crashing down behind them, blocking the path they had come from. The fire was dangerously close now, its searing heat pressing against their backs. The leader turned abruptly, signaling to the others. "Fine, follow us. But if you slow us down," they didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Aaron swallowed hard and adjusted his grip on his father-in-law, relief mingling with fear. As they moved down the narrow path, the fire illuminated the forest in eerie, flickering light. Shadows danced around them, and every snap of a branch sent shivers down Aaron's spine. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting the fire to surge forward and engulf them all. The stranger walked ahead, his flashlight cutting through the smoke, while the masked group led the way. Aaron's mind buzzed with questions. Who were these people? Why were they here? But he didn't dare ask. All that mattered now was surviving the next few minutes. And then, just as the creek curved sharply to the left, a new sound pierced the chaos, the unmistakable hum of helicopter blades. Aaron's heart leapt. Could it be a rescue team? He looked up, squinting through the smoke, but the sky was an impenetrable gray. The sound grew louder, closer, and then it stopped. To be continued. The sudden silence from the helicopter sent a wave of confusion through the group. Aaron craned his neck, trying to catch a glimpse of anything through the thick smoke, but the sky was an unbroken blur of ash and ember. "Did it land?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The masked leader, walking ahead, froze, their body tensing. "Stay quiet," they hissed, their eyes scanning the forest canopy. The group pressed forward cautiously. The only sounds now the crunch of dry leaves underfoot and the distant crackle of the advancing fire. Aaron's father-in-law leaned heavily on him, his breathing shallow and labored. Aaron could feel the older man's strength waning with every step, and fear clawed at him. How much further could he push him? Then, without warning, a blinding spotlight pierced through the smoke, bathing the group in stark white light. The roar of a helicopter engine suddenly erupted overhead, loud and disorienting. "Get down!" someone shouted, but it was too late. Figures in heavy gear descended from ropes, their movements swift and precise. Aaron's heart raced as he dropped to the ground, shielding his father-in-law with his body. "Fire rescue! Stay where you are!" a commanding voice boomed. Relief surged through Aaron as he realized they were being rescued. The masked leader raised their hands slowly, the rest of the group following suit. The rescuers moved quickly, their faces hidden behind helmets and masks, but their intent was clear. They were there to evacuate. One of the rescuers knelt beside Aaron, their voice calm but urgent. "Is he okay to move?" they asked, nodding toward his father-in-law. Aaron shook his head, his voice cracking as he replied, "He's weak. He can't walk much further." The rescuer immediately called for a stretcher, and within moments, 2 others arrived to lift the older man. As they prepared to move, a sudden commotion erupted behind them. The masked group, who had remained eerily silent, were now arguing with the rescuers. "You don't understand," the leader barked. "This fire isn't natural. Someone started this, and it's not over yet." Aaron froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Arson? He thought of the speed at which the fire had spread, the strange way it seemed to target specific areas. Was it possible? The rescuer helping Aaron frowned but kept moving. "That's not our concern right now," they said firmly. "Our job is to get you all out of here alive." But the leader wouldn't back down. "You're making a mistake. They'll strike again," they shouted, their voice filled with desperation. Before anyone could respond, a deafening explosion shattered the tense silence. The ground shook beneath them, and a massive plume of fire erupted in the distance. The group scattered instinctively, the rescuers shouting orders as chaos unfolded. Aaron stumbled, pulling his father-in-law closer as the flames surged higher. His mind raced. Was this the twist the masked leader had warned about? Or was it something even more sinister? The rescue helicopter circled back, its spotlight cutting through the chaos. "We have to move now," a rescuer yelled, grabbing Aaron's arm and leading him toward the chopper. As they ascended into the air, Aaron